Okay, welcome everybody to Dharma Punk Seattle. Tonight we're going to be continuing on with our endeavor of, we started the year with the Four Noble Truths that gave way to the Eightfold Path, and so we're on the second fold of the Eightfold Path. That is wise intention or right intention. And I tend to tend toward the wording of wise because right can feel a little dogmatic, but in an effort to sort of, maybe shed some light on the understanding of, why they use the word right, because the Eightfold Path has a goal, and the goal is to, it's right. It's the path that leads to the end of suffering. So it's pointing us toward this is the right way to do it. If your goal is to end suffering, this is the right way to do that according to Buddhist practice, Buddhist philosophy. And so the wisdom factors in the Eightfold Path consist of last week's talk, wise understanding, and this week's talk of wise intention. So those are the two subsections that make up wisdom. Like how do you develop wisdom? What is wisdom when we're referring to our practice? We're referring to our understanding and our intentions in life and in practice. Wise intention, I was talking to a friend earlier today who isn't super familiar with practice, but kind of mentioned the topic, and again, I think so many of our relationship to words is so important when it comes to approaching the practice and what does it mean, because what comes to mind when I think of intentions is just that like old Christian phrase, which is like, the road to hell was paved with good intentions. And like that's about the extent of, at least before Buddhist practice, I wasn't really thinking about intentions that much. Maybe a New Year's intention, but it's not something that's a very common lexicon. And in that vein, intention comes down to how are we aspiring toward practice? How are we being motivated by practice? I think that those are two ways that we can look at it. And also if like wise view or wise understanding, the first fold of the path is kind of the theory of practice, right? It's like this is our theoretical knowledge, this is our intellectual understanding of the path. Intention is where our hearts come in toward trying to orient ourselves on the path of ending suffering. This is where we start bringing our hearts in. And so the Buddha names 3 different qualities that intention has. And it's interesting because if you think about it, it's like, I'm sure you've read a lot of Buddhist literature, and the common 3 things that they talk about, like greed, hatred, delusion, right? And somehow through the Four Noble Truths of like suffering, end of suffering, those cease. It doesn't really talk about that directly, but it's like, okay, how does that work? And that's where intention comes in, because intention means non-ill will, non-harming and renunciation. They are directly the antonym to greed, hatred, and delusion, right? So we have hatred, which is non-ill will. So the absence of hatred, not the opposite necessarily, but like its counterpart. And then we have greed, where it's more, maybe a more neutral opposite would be renunciation. And then non-harming, right? Which is our kind of opposite to delusion, not causing suffering. So, and I feel like that helps me understand those words a little bit better, because again, like the words, just like non-harming, non-ill will, don't stimulate a lot of like intention for me. But to look at them as the opposites of greed, hatred, and delusion, that brings me a little bit more understanding with these concepts. And so it's also where the Brahma Viharas come in. They fall into the buckets of non-ill will, but it's, I think, a very important aspect of like, it's not the positive opposite, right? Where it's like non-ill will, and then the opposite being loving kindness, right? And that's written intentionally so that way you can have an understanding that if there's an absence of suffering and you're not being like stoked and joyful, that's okay. You can like live in neutral world. And that's like the path too. Or, you know, like if loving kindness isn't present, if compassion isn't present, that's not us necessarily doing the practice wrong. It makes way for other practices like equanimity, which are kind of more ease, more steady, more contentment. So I know that sometimes when I introduce these topics, I can get a little verbose around the vocabulary. And I hope you find that helpful. I mostly try to do that because it's something that I encounter when I'm trying to approach Buddhist literature on my own, and seeing all of these words, trying to make sense of what they mean in terms of the practice. And I think that the better I understand these directly what these words are intended, that gives me the framework to develop wisdom so much easier. I'm not just trying to like shoot arrows in the dark and hope that it sparks wisdom or it sparks non-suffering. That there's these like really easy things that if I learn to plug them in, they can generate that on their own. So as far as the discussion goes around intention, I think a lot of the remainder of the talk is going to pertain to the heart practices, which are appreciative joy, loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and then the honorable mention of forgiveness. So just kind of more of a discussion around like what heart practice is kind of resonating with you right now. Have we forgotten about heart practices? I know that's something that is regular in my own practice is having to remind myself that there's this other side of the practice. You know, it's so easy for me because of the negativity bias of the brain to just focus on all of the suffering and like what's wrong and how do I fix it and how do I, you know, just focus on the suffering and not sort of try to incline my heart and my mind in the Brahma Viharas. And so, and if that's part of intention, is, you know, taking ourselves out of the logical space and including the heart, you know, bringing these two together, talking a little bit about that. So where are we at with the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, equanimity, appreciative joy, compassion, honorable mention, forgiveness? Okay. All right. Let's meditate. Finding a comfortable way to sit that is upright. Begin relaxing the muscles in your hips and your stomach, drawing the lumbar in. Letting your shoulders naturally fall away from the ears, your jaw, muscles around the eyes. Often in the meditations I lead, I'll say set some kind of intention for practice. This intention including non-harming, non-ill will, and renunciation. Reminding ourselves of why this practice is important. Letting this seated posture be a symbol of commitment to that intention. Can I sit here for 30 minutes for this intention? It's not that much to ask. Can I sit with my breath? Notice my breath for this intention. can I let go of the preoccupation of the mind and be open to suggestion for this intention? If the mind gets bored or begins to wander, again, reminding yourself of the intention. It's so easy to slip into thinking out of boredom. When we don't remember that this training matters. When we forget. As you sit here with your intention, begin to notice if there's a attitude or quality arising from the heart. Often just by turning our hearts toward the idea of intention, sort of turning on the light switch, metta or equanimity naturally will sort of rise. Maybe there's a sensation of an opening in the chest or the perception of light. If this isn't coming up very naturally, you can add phrases. I want you to be at ease. I want you to be free. Another way to give rise is recollecting a memory of a kindness someone offered you. acknowledging that this bright contentment, accessible, not dependent on anything else. The suttas, they call it as rare as a wish-fulfilling gem. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering. Now begin recollecting times that you have shown kindness or generosity to others. So often our minds can tell us the story that we still haven't done enough. That we're bad, or broken. It can be an important part of practice to train the mind to remember the good, beautiful, positive things, the non-harming, the non-ill will, the non-greed that we've participated in. Also begin to notice any patterns in the mind. Does the brightness lessen? Is the mind getting more fleety, flighty? As you recollect the goodness. Let yourself be absorbed by your own kindness. This isn't selfish. Finally, bringing something to mind that has been causing some level of suffering in your life. One area that you tend to be hard on yourself about. An individual who bothers you. And attempt to give that same level of kindness that you've given to yourself. Returning back to ourselves, now with the suffering in mind. You can say the phrases as if you're looking at yourself. May you be at ease. May you be free from suffering. If you're a visual person, you can see the suffering being absorbed by the loving kindness that you've generated, that you've cultivated here today. What does it feel like to hold this suffering with kindness? Maybe it's still painful. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe it feels tender or sweet. All of those are okay. meditation is a metta meditation. One of the things, because traditionally, or a lot of the time, when people are taught metta meditations, that comes from, the phrases, a list of phrases that we repeat, and then practicing saying it to ourselves, saying it to someone we don't like, saying it to someone who's kind of neutral, going through the list, the loving kindness tour. And I think that is a great practice. One of the things that I've developed is my own way. And one of the things I always, maybe feel that I haven't always felt the need to caveat, but I felt the need to caveat it here is, when I lead meditations, I attempt to guide folks through the way that I actually access that feeling. The phrases, especially because I've done them so much, they don't generate a lot for me anymore. It's pretty easy for me to just kind of go on autopilot listening to such phrases. And so what I hope when introducing this meditation style is that I'm leading people to the sense feeling of metta, and that it's not sort of an intellectual understanding or like a false sense of metta. And full permission, because we're all different. The way that we're going to experience these practices is so vastly different. And so an encouragement to, listen to the suggestions, take the suggestions, and use them as blocks in your own meditation practice. So there's, going to be certain things that are important to look for, the things like I talk about often with metta, loving kindness meditations, that you might see like a sense of light. That is a really common component for folks who are experiencing metta on some level, is the sensation of light. That's one that's really common for me. But also, that's not everybody's experience of metta. So, there's some level of take these tools, utilize them in your own practice, and tweak them a little bit to see what is getting you to that space of the heart feels open, the body and mind feel at ease, and is willing to hold this stuff. And a reminder that this isn't going to be, experiencing a great sense of metta isn't going to be every meditation. Sometimes the mind is really agitated, it doesn't want to settle, it doesn't want to do the fucking shit, and that's okay. That's okay too. I think one of the important aspects when talking about loving kindness is the way that often there's this idea that it's like a really intense feeling for people. That experiencing loving kindness is this intense, like maybe like almost like joy or something, but feeling like this like crazy heart-opening love. And metta is actually very subtle. It's a very subtle feeling. It can feel like contentment. It can feel like joy. But it's like, you know, where I kind of stopped myself when talking to John earlier about like, I'm going to stop hating and I'm going to just start working with, you know, trying to look at some of the good stuff. Like that too is meta. It's not just trying to be extra nice to ourselves, though that can be a part of it. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about my teacher's perspective when it comes to intention, right? Because as mentioned earlier, intention is more neutral. It can include these positive qualities like metta and compassion, but it's the absence of hatred. Just like, what is it like to not hate? What is it like to not harm? Renunciation, what is it like to not be full of needing something outside of myself to feel good? So my teacher will often, you know, sometimes when generating these qualities feel really, really difficult, uses the word mercy, which is something that I really like, because sometimes with the suffering in the heart or the anger at somebody is so fucking intense, the idea of, you know, wishing kindness, you know, on that person who's being a total fucking dick, or myself for being a total fucking dick, is really challenging. You know, it's hard to feel like, I know for me in my own practice, I like to feel like I'm being honest. I don't like to feel like I'm trying to say something that is wishful thinking. And so including this idea of mercy in the practice of like, okay, I can't not have a little hate. But I'm gonna try to reel back because my intention is non-ill will. My intention is non-ill will. And can I sit in that place of mercy where it's like, okay, I'm not wishing anything positive for you, but I'm not wishing you anything negative either. So, you know, I feel like mercy kind of falls into that like non-ill will pretty well. It's like, you know, I'm granting you some relief from my own hatred. And, you know, bringing that toward ourselves. You know, I think that, again, you know, I don't know, some people might argue with me, some teachers might argue with me. I think mercy is loving kindness. It's a subtler form, but being in a space of opening, right? Even if it's a small one, right? Because that's kind of what it feels like in those moments where, you know, we have that person, we have that resentment in mind, and it's like a contraction happens, and we're like closed up, and we're like, fuck no. And, you know, it's metta that pushes through, even if it's just mercy, and we're just like, you know, just doing a little peek. Maybe it's not full like, and I wish you well, and I'm fully open, and I'm fully here. But like, you know, I still feel like that is a movement of metta to kind of open a little bit. A movement toward our intentions. And again, you know, like how often in our day do we reflect on our intentions? for practice. I know in my own practice, it's so easy for it to be a doldrum and mundane. And, you know, when it begins to be a doldrum and mundane, it becomes less important. We don't do things we don't like, period. And, you know, again, like I do feel like I have to be like, no, you don't have to like every meditation you do. You don't have to like every Dharma talk you listen to. You don't have to love every minute of life. But bringing ourselves back to those intentions that we set, whether it's whether it's the Buddhist framework of non-ill will, non-harming and renunciation, or it's our own sense of like what we want from this practice. That might ring the same bell, you know, without those words that are a little like uninspiring. But, you know, it's kind of coming back to something that I talk about a lot, which is coming from a place of our values. You know, when we set intention, it's coming from a place where we have to make fewer decisions because our heart has already opened and oriented toward that space. We don't have to worry about making so many different intentions. If we allow ourselves to that space to be reminded, and that's what meditation is for. You know, I think we get on the cushion and we're like, yeah, I was just about to crack my fingers, you know, okay, what am I working out right now? And sometimes it's that, for sure, but I think it can be so much more useful as a statement of, this is the intention, the posture is the intention I'm setting toward trying to live a life of non-suffering, trying to live a life of not creating suffering in the world, because there's so many fucking people who are doing that. I'm trying my best to not be a major participant in the causing of suffering in the world. And this posture, this sitting posture, is meant to be a reminder of that. And I think that one of the things that comes up for me around intention as well is you know, how I talked a little bit about last week, where there's, you know, these are the precursors toward our actions, right? So last week was wise understanding or wise view, and then there's wise intention, and those precede the you know, the morality section of the Eightfold Path, right? Our speech, our actions, our livelihood. And so when we get these ones sort of shifted into a space, then we don't have to think so hard about these other three. They just kind of naturally, you know, this place where we're generating our karma, you're just going to be doing it because these ones are already in check, right? You know, I think that if we, you know, I'll try not to go too deeply into the next ones, but like if we try to think about how easy is it to be super intentional about our speech. It's fucking impossible. It's happening so fast. And so if we want to try to generate less karma, some less bad shit for ourselves, less suffering, coming back to these spaces is where we go. You know, rather than maybe a therapeutic behavioralist method where we, try to continue to work and tinker on our behaviors. We come back to our intentions. We come back to our understanding that produces all of that shit. And in the suttas, it talks about intention was one of the first things that before the Buddha gave his first talk as the enlightened, he discovered intention, and through that method, or through some of his previous methods of meditation, he describes what are called the two heaps, which is really not that complex. It's categorizing thought into harmful, not harmful. And often in my own meditation, yes, we want to understand our suffering. That's that's the entirety of the path, right? And also, we have to be so careful, because often if we overcompensate too hard with that, what can happen is we'll start seeing suffering like a heat-seeking missile and just dart toward it, and then just generate more suffering on it, right? We're running toward our suffering, trying to fix it, and we just create more and more suffering around it, trying to figure it out, right? That's what I mean. And so, reminder of the purpose of being able to also just ignore some thoughts. An analogy that I really like when talking about this is if someone asks about suffering, if they would say, if I fall out of a tree, do I have to know how many branches I passed before I fell? And the answer is no, it's enough to know that you fell. And so using that sort of strategy and that sort of analogy, when it comes to, this wisdom, this investigative quality, it's enough to know that suffering was there, right? And moving toward this, putting it in the heap, unpleasant, caused harm, over and over again, and realigning, intention, non-harm. Another analogy that I use frequently, and I'll end with this, is looking at our minds as if they were a village, and in the village are our thoughts, and many of these thoughts are villagers we know well, right? There's old kill yourself, there's old there's old I want a Dorito, we know those villagers very well. They're always hanging out. And we don't have to interrogate these villagers. you know, as we stroll through our day. We know them. We can just nod. Hello, 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 hello. And if someone new shows up in the village, like, yeah, hang out. What's up? Where are you from? I haven't seen you around before. That's a good time. But if it's that same old story, it's good enough to know that it was harmful. Thoughts or questions?
When you were talking about mercy instead of hatred,
Mm-hmm.
it made me think of the phrase, "Have the day you deserve."
Have the day you deserve.
Which, like, usually when that phrase is used, it's like, I hope something bad happens to you. But it feels a lot more neutral when time use that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very like on that border because it can be a little tongue in cheek of like, I know you're gonna fuck up and you're gonna get fucked up shit.
Karma's coming.
and I might delight in that a little bit, but yeah, I do like that.
You know, maybe they did something.
Yeah. All right. Beautiful. Crystal clear. Donna, if you would like to donate for the rents, $5 to $10 suggested donation in the bowl. Venmo and Cash App options are available. Yeah, let's dedicate some merit. All right. May any goodness that was cultivated today through practice, through effort, through energy, through intention, be spread above and below to the seen and the unseen, to those being born and to those who are dying. Dang.